Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Riley Lewis Show. I am your host, Riley Lewis. We have some interesting things to talk about today, but first I want to start by saying that I have officially finished the one of two summer reading books that I've been assigned, so I wanted to show you guys that. So, again, The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This is a very interesting story about a kid named Elwood Curtis, who is a young African American boy who lives with his grandmother in Frenchtown in Tallahassee, Florida, during the 1950s and the 1960s, so during the period where there was still racial segregation. This is Jim Crow era South. And on his way to college, actually, his first day of college, he picks up a ride. He hitchhikes a ride from somebody who stole a car. Elwood did not know this. However, the police officer pulls them over and does not believe Elwood, and he is sentenced to a reform school that wound up killing, that's right, killing 98 boys, white Americans and African Americans, and many others, I should say, different persuasions, many different boys, but they wound up killing a total of 98 boys between the years 1917 and 1917 and 1973, I believe. The school was in operation from January 1st, 1900 until 2011, when there was a bunch of these stories coming out, including this, not just this author, but lots of stories of kids that had been sentenced to that school. And if you want to look this school up, it's called the Allen Dozier or Dozier, Dozier School for Boys, and that was again in Tallahassee, Florida. That said, that was a very good book. I really highly recommend it. That said, I am now starting my second book. I've actually already started this. I'm about 50 pages in. It's called The Lost Children Archive. This is a book that chronicles someone who actually studies sound and soundscapes in the world. And she decides, not really knowing at the time the ordeal this would be, but she agrees to follow this woman to the southern border of the United States. So they go from their New York apartment to the southern border of the United States, I believe in Arizona. Yes, in Arizona, where the husband is doing some research on the last Apache tribe to surrender during the 1860s and 1850s and 1860s to the white Americans and Europeans and the United States Army when there was actual armed conflict between tribes and the United States government. And then the mom and the wife, in this case, she is also a researcher who has again agreed to help this family basically reunite at the border. And it's a very interesting book that chronicles a real event. Just a couple of years ago, you might remember when we had, I think well over 100,000 many unaccompanied minors who were arriving daily at our southern border. I believe like maybe 1,000 a day or so for several weeks, and it was very intense, and the conditions were not particularly good for these children. And it just sort of chronicles that, which is an interesting discussion that I think I'll have in a future episode about what exactly those unaccompanied minors were running from. In many cases, places like Honduras and Venezuela. And if you're not familiar with what's going on in Honduras or Venezuela, for example, is there are inflation rates over 1,000,000%, so your money isn't really worth anything by the time you get your paycheck. People have been occupying the streets and the interstate system. Nicolas Maduro took over after the death of Hugo Chavez and has denied international aid and is starving out his own people. Over 3 million people have left Venezuela since 2015, many of whom were coming to, Mexico, the United States, Canada, right? So this is a book that sort of chronicles many of those children that, got caught up in that system. In any case, I just wanted to take today's episode to really just, I guess, present something of a warning. I did this on my audio-only podcast, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Anchor, Anchor.fm. But I've been thinking about this a lot lately because it seems like many people at this point explicitly want the destruction of the country. There are many people who think that our systems are rotten to the core, and one of the areas this really surfaces in for me that's concerning is watching weekend after weekend of really calamities going on in New York City right now where the police are standing down. De Blasio's redirected money, and consequently, we've seen, excuse me, we've seen a skyrocket in not only violent crime, but we've also seen a skyrocket in gunshot wounds and in like shootings and in shooting accidents between civilians. And this is very concerning. And we're also coming up on an election, which is going to absolutely take the political climate right now, the pre existing conditions, and it's going to amplify those attitudes. So I'm getting really concerned that number one, when number one, I just don't think that we can build anything on destruction. And I think a lot of our language right now focuses on destruction instead of creating progress, building a better future, fighting for peace and justice. Instead, what I see is burn it all to the ground, get rid of everything, defund the police, not my hashtag, not my president. People are canceling, you know, people who like Joe Rogan because they disagree with the fact that Joe Rogan isn't afraid of having people come on because he actually believes in freedom of speech, and this is offending some people. So I've had friends who literally say like, Joe Rogan, you're canceled, and to those people it's like you're acting like you're for but in any case, there's a lot of tension right now in a particular brand of contempt and hostility that I do not think is going to precipitate any sort of progress. And I just sort of want to put this out there as a warning because I've really been thinking about this. And if we want change in a safer, better world, then I think we need to start with a ceasefire, a truce, actually putting down the arms, laying down the guns. So the stuff that we've been seeing in Seattle, New York, I've seen every day I see new videos of someone being assaulted or brutalized or killed. And, whether or not it's talked about in the media, it still tells me that we're really in a delicate, fragile place right now. And we're coming up on an election where it seems like the stakes have never been higher and the media has never been more, like this is a great time for the media to sow division because they're making so much money on it, and they're really revived in the era of Trump. There were so many stations who would have really just basically drowned if Hillary Clinton had gotten in office because honestly things would be not boring but different for sure. In any case, there's this three-way intersection between rhetoric and violence and politics. And in the center of that three-way intersection is the election of 2020. And whether Trump gets it, whether Joe Biden gets it, or whether Kanye West gets it, I just am not confident that whomever is elected, I'm not confident that the American people will be able to accept the results of the 2020 election because there were so many people who were unable to accept the results of the 2016 election. And I'm greatly concerned, regardless of who's in office, about the precedents we're setting. Regular government shutdowns, launching an impeachment, even if it's completely partisan because you don't like someone, stonewalling presidents like, people like the conservatives did to Barack Obama during his, second term, just like Democrats are doing to Donald Trump right now, refusing to work with the president. These are things that are indicative of a fragile society, a almost like a developing society. This should not be how things operate in a modern, developed, in a postmodern, developed, innovative hegemon such as the United States. By 2020 in the United States, you would think we would be able to have conversations. We would be able to have reasonable discourse without it devolving into fights and to yelling. You would think that our journalists would set better examples. You think that our leaders would set better examples, including the president, but they aren't. So that doesn't mean that we can just point to them and say they're behaving that way, so we get to behave that way. It means that we have to be better. We have to be better. If someone goes and robs a bank, are you going to go rob a bank? No, because you don't want to be the kind of person that harms innocent civilians or harms innocent people. I don't know, maybe you do. So I guess I just want this video to be a warning. I want us to all just take some deep breaths and go into this election understanding that, realistically speaking, whatever happens, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, or Kanye West, number one, the president is not a dictator. They don't have that much power. And I've heard many people say this, even though they do not like Donald Trump, not that much has particularly changed in the last 3 years. We're not in any major wars. We're not really in any major even trade wars anymore since we've made a deal with China. I mean, the biggest thing that's gone on in the last 3 years or plus is honestly the outbreak, the coronavirus. So that said, I just want people to understand, knowing that, regardless of what happens in 2020, it's not going to be the end of the world. It will be 4 years, and then we will choose somebody else again. So and I just want to emphasize this because I think the media really, really highlights this. I think the media wants you to believe that if you don't get your choice, not only is it not a democracy, but also it's the apocalypse. And neither one of those things are true. Democracy does not mean that you always get what you want. It means that you get a say, but so does everybody else. So that's number one. Number two, it's not going to be the end of the world regardless of who gets in. I don't really particularly want Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Kanye West, but I also understand that realistically, it's not going to be the apocalypse if either one of those people is in office for 48 months. That's not that much time. It's not like Xi Jinping where that person's just in there for life, for a lifetime term, and they just have a one-party state, and it's a puppet people's Congress basically, and whatever you say goes. We in 48 months from this election in November, we'll elect somebody else. So regardless of who you plan on voting for in 2020, just know that it's not going to be the end of the world. And our fate really realistically has much more to do with us and with what we do and how we respond. So this is something I said in my audio only podcast, but again, I want to say it here also. I think what's even more important than the outcome of the 2020 election is how we respond to the results of the election and how we decide to move forward, how we decide to treat each other. If we all want to reconcile, then we will reconcile. But if we all want to find any possible reason at all to divide each other along lines of race, religion, politics, well, there's always going to be a million reasons that you can find to further divide people. But on the flip side, if you really actually want to unify people and to unite people, well, then damn it, start doing it. Start uniting people, start treating people better, start listening to people more actively, start expressing yourself more respectfully and politely, and start engaging in your community. And maybe that means for you, your family, your roommates, the classroom, the workplace. But I just know this. The 2020 election is not going to determine our fate. We will determine our fate. So regardless of what happens, just know that you and I have all the power in the world. The people who run this government, the people who run the world, are no smarter than you and I. And once we figure that out, we have all the power. Thank you everybody for listening to today's episode of The Riley Lewis Show. I'm going to keep this one nice and short. I appreciate your time if you stayed. I hope to see you here again tomorrow, where I'll be back to my regular daily politics podcast with some news. You've been listening to The Riley Lewis Show. If you'd like to support me and support my content, you can subscribe to this channel down below. You'll also find a link right there to the Daily Politics Podcast playlist, where you can find more of my episodes and discover, a little bit about current events and join me for some interesting discussions and really just my thoughts as I share them out loud with you. You can also find The Riley Lewis Show available on Anchor.fm, Breaker, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. Again, you've been listening to The Riley Lewis Show. Thank you.